In the hushed shadows of the San Giovanni Rotondo monastery, during the solemn days of Holy Week, an almost otherworldly silence would descend upon the stone halls. It wasn't just a stillness born of reverence or tradition. No, it was deeper than that. It was the kind of silence that presses against the soul, that whispers of mysteries unseen, of a world just behind the veil of this one. To those who lived alongside him, Padre Pio moved through this silence like a man caught between two realms. His steps were deliberate, his eyes weary and radiant all at once. He bore the weight of invisible things. The wounds of Christ were carved into his flesh, but deeper still were the burdens of what he saw, heard, and carried in his spirit. During Holy Week, the air around him felt different, denser, charged. Monks and visitors alike would speak in whispers, not by instruction, but instinct. And Padre Pio himself, always drawn to prayer, seemed even more withdrawn, spending long hours in the chapel, kneeling, weeping, conversing with someone only he could see. It was in one of these quiet mornings before the sun had risen, when the monastery was lit only by flickering candlelight and the faint tolling of a distant bell, that Padre Pio spoke a sentence that struck those around him like a thunderclap. "Do not eat red meat during Holy Week." The words were simple. There was no anger in them, no explanation, no sermon, just that, a quiet, firm command that echoed far beyond the surface. Those who heard it were puzzled. Many assumed it was a form of fasting, an act of penance. After all, wasn't it already customary for Catholics to abstain from meat on Fridays, especially Good Friday? But there was something different in Padre Pio's tone, something heavier. He wasn't speaking about custom, he was speaking about something spiritual, something hidden. Later, when pressed for explanation, he would only shake his head and say, "There are things you do not understand. The body influences the soul, and some foods awaken what should remain asleep." This wasn't about health or religious rules, it was about protection, about preparing the soul for a battle most people didn't even know they were part of. To Padre Pio, Holy Week wasn't just a time of remembering Christ's passion, it was a living mystery, a doorway through which both divine grace and spiritual darkness moved more freely. And red meat, particularly beef and pork, carried something he considered disruptive, heavy, a link to more primal instincts, to energies that blurred the boundary between flesh and spirit. He believed that during this sacred time, when the veil between heaven and earth grows thinner, what we allow into our bodies matters profoundly, because in those days, the soul is listening more closely. The gates are open, and every choice, no matter how small, echoes louder. So he warned, "Do not eat red meat during Holy Week." Not out of fear, but out of reverence, out of the desire to remain close to the suffering Christ, unburdened by the weight of the flesh, attuned to the still, quiet voice that calls us toward the cross, and through it, toward resurrection. When Padre Pio quietly warned against the consumption of red meat during Holy Week, many initially believed it to be a simple call to deeper penance. After all, abstaining from meat on Good Friday is a well-known Catholic tradition, a gesture of respect, of sacrifice, a way to mirror in a small way the suffering of Christ on the cross. But those close to Padre Pio soon realized that his warning wasn't just about Good Friday, nor was it a suggestion for simple discipline or devotion. It was a clear, unwavering instruction. Do not eat red meat during the entire Holy Week. And there was something in the way he said it, not harshly, but with a solemn urgency, that made people listen more closely. He emphasized the days leading up to the Passion, especially Holy Thursday and Good Friday, as moments when the spiritual realm draws nearer to ours, moments when the veil between the material and the eternal thins, and the soul becomes more vulnerable to both divine grace and darker forces. Padre Pio explained that red meat, particularly from animals like cows and pigs, carried something that went beyond its physical substance. He wasn't speaking as a nutritionist or even as a theologian. He spoke as a mystic, as someone who had glimpsed firsthand the battles waged in the invisible world. To him, meat had a certain energetic weight, a density. It was bound not just to the body, but to a deeper level of instinct, the primal layers of the human person where desires take root. He believed that in ordinary time, the body and soul live in a constant push and pull, but during Holy Week, that struggle intensifies, and anything that feeds the lower instincts, anger, lust, impatience, gluttony, becomes a spiritual risk. It's not just for the body, it's for the soul, he once whispered to a fellow friar during Holy Week, after refusing a meal that included meat. And during these days, the soul must be free, light, able to suffer with Christ, not weighed down by flesh. According to Padre Pio, meat awakened more than just physical appetite. It stirred passions. It fed impulses that lie dormant most of the time, but can rise with force when given fuel, especially when the soul is exposed, raw, in the sacred tension of the passion. He spoke of it not as superstition, but as spiritual physics, that what we eat, how we eat, and when we eat can alter the balance of forces within us. And if during the days when Christ relives his agony, we continue to feed our bodies carelessly, we risk silencing the interior voice that is calling us to walk with him, to suffer with him, to fast not just in food but in spirit. He even suggested that eating red meat during this time could dull the senses, making it harder to pray, to meditate, to truly feel the mystery of the cross. Some who disobeyed his counsel reported feeling restless, irritated, or spiritually heavy in the days that followed. One friar admitted in confession to having secretly eaten a piece of roasted pork brought in by a visitor on Holy Thursday. That night, he dreamed of a great beast pacing outside his cell, growling in the shadows. When he told Padre Pio about it the next day, the saint looked at him with quiet sorrow and said, "Some doors are opened by a single bite." This wasn't about condemnation, it was about discernment. Padre Pio saw Holy Week as a battleground, a time when Christ suffers not only in history, but in eternity. And we, his followers, are invited into that suffering, not with dramatic gestures, but with small faithful steps, silence, prayer, humility, and yes, even in what we choose, or refuse, to eat. Because according to Padre Pio, red meat during Holy Week wasn't just food, it was fuel for the wrong fire. For most, the concept of blood in Holy Week is a symbol, a powerful image of Christ's suffering and the price of redemption. But for Padre Pio, blood was not symbolic. It was real, sacred, and alive. This was a man who bore the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, not as metaphor but in his very flesh. His hands, feet, and side bled for decades, mystically united to the passion of Jesus. Every drop of blood that fell from his body was, in his eyes, a participation in something far beyond human comprehension. So when he spoke of blood, he spoke from a place of intimate, supernatural knowledge. To Padre Pio, Christ's blood was not a memory of the past. It was not a historical event to be honored once a year. It was a living presence flowing still invisibly in the mystery of the Eucharist, in the Mass, in the suffering of souls. And especially as during Holy Week, that blood became more potent, more near. He believed that during these sacred days the world is drawn closer to Calvary and the veil between time and eternity thins. In that mystical convergence, every soul is invited to kneel once more at the foot of the cross, to contemplate, to mourn, to be purified by the blood that still cries out from Golgotha. But not all blood, he warned, belongs at that altar. Padre Pio spoke with particular intensity about the blood of animals, specifically that shed for human consumption. He wasn't preaching vegetarianism, nor was he condemning those who ate meat in general. He understood human needs. But during Holy Week the rules shifted. The spiritual weight of what was eaten became heavier, more consequential. He recounted visions in which he saw people gathered at dinner tables during Holy Week, joyfully consuming platters of red meat. But as he looked upon them with the eyes of the Spirit, the scene changed. The warmth of the family meal dissolved into something darker, the tables transformed into altars, the meat into freshly slaughtered offerings, the feasting into ritual, and surrounding those tables he saw shadows, figures without faces watching, not in joy but in hunger. "Don't you see?" he would say to the brothers who dared to ask him about these visions. "It's like offering another blood when the only one that matters has already been shed on Golgotha." To Padre Pio, eating red meat during Holy Week wasn't just an error of devotion, it was a spiritual contradiction. While Christ poured out his innocent blood for the salvation of mankind, people were willingly consuming the blood of beasts. Blood shed without grace, without meaning, and at times without mercy. He feared that this act, innocent as it may seem, could spiritually dull the senses, disrupting the delicate harmony that Holy Week was meant to bring. In those days, he believed, the soul should be sensitized to suffering, softened to grace, moved by the agony of Christ. But the shedding of animal blood and the indulgence of the flesh could block that flow. It could tie the soul back down to the earth just when it was being invited to rise toward heaven. He even spoke of meat as a form of counter-sacrifice, not intentionally evil, but spiritually misplaced, a mirror image of the true sacrifice, offered not in love, but in appetite. And in such a holy time, when the world is once again kneeling before the cross, even small acts of indulgence could carry unexpected spiritual consequences. That's why his warning was so firm, yet so sorrowful. It wasn't about legalism. It wasn't about guilt. It was about honoring the blood that still flows from the side of Christ, and making sure that in our own homes we aren't unknowingly offering another. Because for Padre Pio, the mystery of Holy Week was not a page in Scripture. It was unfolding, always unfolding before our very eyes, and our response to it, even in something as simple as a meal, could either unite us with the Lamb of God or place us at a different altar entirely. Among the many stories whispered through the walls of San Giovanni Rotondo, few remain as unsettling and as revealing as the one recounted by a friar who lived in close proximity to Padre Pio during his most intense years of spiritual combat. It was Holy Thursday. The air in the monastery was thick with reverence. Candles flickered in long corridors. Silence, as always during Holy Week, pressed in like fog, heavy, expectant. The friars moved about quietly, their hearts already attuned to the unfolding mystery of the Passion. That afternoon, a devout layman, someone known to the community for his generosity, arrived at the monastery carrying a carefully prepared dish. It was a traditional meat stew, made with love, meant as a gesture of thanks to the friars. He had no ill intentions. In his eyes, it was a gift of honor, a way to support the brothers who, for him, lived close to God. The man handed it to the kitchen brother, who thanked him politely and placed it on the counter. The smell was rich, savory, and oddly out of place amidst the incense and fasting bread of Holy Week. But before anyone could even lift the lid, something happened. Padre Pio, who had been passing by on his way to the chapel, stopped mid-step outside the kitchen door. His body stiffened. His face, usually composed in stoic serenity, turned white as linen. For a long moment, he said nothing. He didn't enter the kitchen. He didn't look at the food. He simply stood there and still listening, as though hearing something no one else could. Then, in a voice low and sharp, filled with a gravity that cut through the air like a knife, he said, "Send that away. Now." The brother standing in the doorway didn't question him. He grabbed the dish immediately and rushed to take it outside. But in the moments that followed, something even stranger began to occur. A foul odor suddenly swept through the kitchen. Not the scent of food, but of something rotting, something unnatural. One friar began to cough uncontrollably. Another had to sit down, gripped by a sudden nausea that he couldn't explain. And that night, as the monastery settled into uneasy rest, disturbance came with the darkness. One of the brothers, a young novice known for his simple faith, woke up screaming in the middle of the night. He had dreamt, or seen, a horned figure, tall and cloaked in smoke, walking through the halls of the monastery. It didn't speak. It didn't act. It only observed, moving slowly past each door, stopping now and then, breathing heavily, its presence like a cold wind pressing against the soul. When he told the others the next morning, they dismissed it as a nightmare. But Padre Pio said nothing. No correction, no comfort. Instead, he had spent the entire night alone, kneeling before the crucifix in the chapel. Witnesses who passed by in the night said they saw his shoulders trembling. They heard weeping, and at one point, a sound like groaning, not from physical pain, but as if bearing a spiritual weight too heavy to name. By dawn, the dish was gone. No one saw where it had gone or who had taken it. It simply vanished, as if whatever it carried had been rejected by the house, by the saint, or by something greater. Padre Pio never spoke of it again, but those close to him knew. This was not about superstition. It was not about fear of food or disrespect toward the man who brought it. It was about something deeper, something spiritual. They began to understand in whispers and uneasy glances what Padre Pio had tried to teach them, that during Holy Week, even the most ordinary things could become vessels of spiritual weight. That food, so innocent in its daily role, could, if misaligned with the sacred rhythm of that week, become a door left ajar, a door through which something dark might pass. Padre Pio, it seemed, could sense the resonance of offerings. He could feel the dissonance of what did not belong. And in that moment, what appeared to be a generous dish was, in truth, a disruption, a break in the holy atmosphere that he fought so hard to maintain during those days of divine sorrow. That experience became a quiet legend among the brothers. They never spoke of it openly, but from that year on, no one ever brought red meat to the monastery during Holy Week again, and if someone did, it was turned away before it crossed the threshold, because they had learned, through silence, through sickness, through visions, that when Padre Pio said, "Send that away," he wasn't just rejecting a meal, he was protecting a sanctuary. For Padre Pio, the days of Holy Week were not merely liturgical observances or annual commemorations, they were a sacred passage, a narrow spiritual corridor through which the soul must pass, if it wished to walk truly alongside Christ. And to walk that path, he insisted, the body had to be made ready. He taught with calm but piercing clarity that during Holy Week the human body should become a quiet sanctuary, a living chapel where every gesture, every breath, every bite was offered not for pleasure, but for transformation. Food in this sacred time was no longer just sustenance. It became an act of worship, a sign of interior readiness. He often urged his fellow friars and spiritual children to eat with utter simplicity, favoring plant-based meals, plain bread, a bit of oil or fruit, in the manner of the ancient desert fathers. Not out of ascetic pride, nor from a belief that meat was impure in itself, but because Holy Week was not a time for satisfying the flesh, it was a time for emptying it, for silencing the noise of appetite, and making space for the voice of God to echo more clearly within. "You want to feel the weight of the cross, yet you eat like kings?" Padre Pio once asked a group of visitors during Holy Week. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was heavy with sorrow, not condemnation, but disappointment, as if he could see the deep disconnect between their outer rituals and inner reality. To him it was not enough to attend the liturgies, to kneel in prayer, to meditate on the Passion. One had to embody the mystery, and that embodiment began with the body itself, its posture, its speech, its stillness, and most intimately its hunger. He viewed the body not as an enemy of the soul, but as its first instrument. And like any instrument, it had to be tuned, gently, precisely, with attention. And during Holy Week, the tuning was meant to bring it into harmony with the Passion of Christ. He often compared these days to Gethsemane, a garden of decision, a moment when Jesus, fully God yet fully man, felt the crushing weight of what was to come. His soul, Padre Pio reminded others, was sorrowful unto death. And in that sorrow, he ate nothing. This, Pio believed, was not incidental. It was essential. Christ's hunger was part of his sacrifice. And if we truly wish to unite ourselves to him, we must begin, humbly, by entering into that fast. Not everyone could live like a monk. Padre Pio knew that. But he also knew that even small sacrifices, a skipped meal, a plain dinner, a glass of water instead of wine, could become sacred if offered with love and reverence. It wasn't about what was eaten, but why. Was the meal feeding your strength to carry the cross, or was it lulling your soul into comfort just when it needed to wake and watch? He warned that indulgence, even in modest forms, had the power to numb the soul, to muffle the delicate whisper of grace that often speaks loudest in times of emptiness. "This week is for dying with Christ," he said one Holy Wednesday as he emerged from hours of silent prayer. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. And those who indulge in pleasure, even small ones, lose the key to the mystery. What did he mean by the mystery? Not just the events of the Passion, but the mystical union between Christ and the soul. A union that could only take place through shared suffering, through mutual offering. To eat simply, to restrain desire, to embrace hunger for a few days, these were not acts of misery. They were acts of invitation, ways of saying, "Yes, Lord, I will go with you, not only in song, not only in ritual, but in my very body." In the quiet corners of the monastery, Padre Pio was often seen eating little during Holy Week. A piece of bread, a few olives, sometimes nothing at all. His body, already broken by pain and supernatural burden, did not resist. It surrendered. And in that surrender he became a witness. That holiness is not found in extravagance, but in emptiness filled by grace. So the question Padre Pio left, silently and insistently, was this: if the temple of God is within you, how will you keep it during Holy Week? With reverence or routine, with sacrifice or satisfaction, because the cross cannot rest upon a soul that is still feasting. It rests upon the one who has made room, in flesh and spirit, for the mystery of love that bleeds. Padre Pio often spoke in whispers when it came to the subject of evil. Not out of fear, he feared nothing but offending God, but out of respect for the gravity of the unseen. He knew, better than most, that the greatest battles were not waged on battlefields or in public arenas, but in the hidden places, in the soul, in the mind, and in the silence of the night. And during Holy Week, he warned, those battles intensified. He told his spiritual children that during this most sacred time, when the Church contemplates the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, the forces of darkness become restless. They rage not only because of what Holy Week represents, but because of what it unleashes, an outpouring of grace, a thinning of the veil, a renewal of souls that threatens the dominion of the enemy. It is in these days, Padre Pio said, that Satan grows bold. He himself was no stranger to these invisible wars. His own body bore the marks of combat. During Holy Week especially, he would be subject to violent spiritual attacks. Brothers in the monastery reported hearing strange sounds from his room at night, thuds, crashes, groaning. One brother claimed to hear what sounded like mocking laughter echoing down the hallway. And more than once, Padre Pio described to his confessor the smell of sulfur that would suddenly fill his cell during prayer. It was real, tangible, not metaphor. And he was clear. These things didn't happen by accident. They came because Holy Week was a time when the soul drew nearer to Christ, and the closer one gets to the light, the more the shadows press in. That's why Padre Pio was so insistent on the smallest details during this sacred time, not just in liturgy or in prayer, but in the physical life of the believer, especially, he said, in what we allow into our bodies. He believed with unshakable conviction that the spiritual often begins with the physical, that every act of the body, what we eat, how we rest, what we choose to indulge or deny, has a direct impact on the soul. And during Holy Week, when the soul is especially open and vulnerable, even the smallest misstep could be dangerous. It's in the small compromises that the devil enters, he once told a friar who had brushed off the idea of abstaining from certain foods. It's never through the front door, it's always through the cracks. For Padre Pio, red meat during Holy Week was one of those cracks, not because the food was evil, but because it symbolized a concession, a moment where the spirit bowed to the flesh, when it should be the other way around. He believed that red meat, rich and heavy, stirred the lower passions, irritability, lethargy, even lust. And in a time meant for contemplation, repentance, and self-emptying, such passions were not just distractions, they were invitations. To what? To whom? To the one who waits for just such invitations. Padre Pio did not live in paranoia. He lived in discernment. He knew that the enemy cannot possess a soul that is firmly rooted in grace, but he also knew that temptations often enter through what is permitted, what is ignored, what is rationalized. And so he warned, during Holy Week, be vigilant, not just in your prayers, but in your habits, your meals, your moods, your conversations, because when the soul is exposed to the divine, it is also more visible to the demonic. That's why he fasted more intensely. why he kept silence longer, why he guarded his body as carefully as his mind, because he understood that the body is not separate from the soul, it is its doorway. And in a week when heaven draws near, it matters deeply who or what we allow to cross that threshold. Perhaps in today's world, saturated with rationalism, dominated by convenience and appetite, such teachings seem extreme, outdated, maybe even superstitious. How could something as simple as a piece of meat hold any real spiritual consequence? But Padre Pio did not see the world as we do. He lived between two dimensions, one foot in the visible, the other deeply planted in the invisible. His wounds, his visions, his prayers were not figments of imagination. They were witnesses to a reality deeper than flesh and blood. He never imposed rules out of rigidity. He didn't speak of fasting to control or punish the body. He wasn't bound by tradition for tradition's sake. When he asked, no, begged, us to avoid red meat during Holy Week, it wasn't from pride or fear. It was an invitation, a silent, reverent invitation to step out of the ordinary, to pause, to listen, to remove just one layer of comfort, so that another voice, softer, holier, could be heard. That voice doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it waits, and it is clearest when the body is quiet, light, open. Padre Pio believed that for one sacred week, the body should not be a place of indulgence but of preparation, a vessel emptied of worldly cravings so that it might be filled with something eternal. He wanted us to make our table an altar, not in ritual, but in reverence, to treat each meal not as a rite but as a prayer, to taste not just food, but the hunger behind it, the longing for God, the aching of the soul for something more than the immediate. Let every bite be a step toward Golgotha, he once said, and every hunger a cry for the resurrection. In Holy Week, the Church walks once more through the mystery of Christ's suffering and triumph. It is not just a story to be read or a mass to be attended. It is a spiritual event, alive, breathing, unfolding again within us, if we are willing. And to be willing means to be awake, not lulled by pleasure, not numbed by routine, but alert, expectant, broken open. Padre Pio believed that the body could help, or hinder that awakening, that food, when chosen with intention, could become a spiritual act, and that even the refusal of meat for a few days could become a sacred fast, a key that unlocks deeper doors within. This was not about legalism. This was about love, about drawing near to the cross not only with our minds but with our entire being. He wanted us to experience Holy Week not as spectators, but as participants, to feel, in our own flesh, the tension between death and life, suffering and redemption, sorrow and hope. And so he left us this quiet challenge. Can you give up what is unnecessary to receive what is eternal? Can you hunger in the body that your soul might be filled? This is the mystery Padre Pio lived every day, a mystery wrapped in silence, pain, devotion, and grace. So now, as another Holy Week approaches, the question remains, not with judgment, but with gentle urgency. What will you place upon your table? Not just in the kitchen, but in your heart. Not just for nourishment, but for remembrance. Not just to eat, but to worship. Because sometimes the holiest feasts begin with a simple fast, and the greatest miracles begin in silence.